All right, Wise Guy here, and today I'm working on my 2005 Lincoln Aviator, which should be similar to the Mountaineer and Explorer models. Servicing the radiator, and I have some good news and some bad news about the experience through this procedure. And I'll start with the good news, and that was that I didn't have to disconnect any AC lines, and I was actually able to remove the radiator as a standalone unit by itself. And some more good news is I do have the factory book from Ford, and I'll show you the step-by-step procedure for this. And I'll start with that, showing an exploded view of the cooling system. You can pause it here if you needed to gather some information, some of the part names and the part number. Flipping over to the next page is the section on the radiator. Looks like 14 steps. Pretty straightforward. At least it sounds like that. Now, the bad news is, unfortunately, I decided to start filming this after I had the radiator removed, but don't worry. As I'm putting it back together, you can imagine what it was like getting it removed, and I'm going to show some of the difficulties and some of the obstructions that I had. And I'm going to start by showing these little pieces here. This is at the top of the track that slides. I'll get you a good view of the motor we're working on, as different models look different, but usually these radiators are the same. Might have a different upper hose. Anyway, on this track right here, this is where the radiator will slide down this track. It does remove from the top, and at the top part of it here, I couldn't really notice this, but there's this metal piece, and it pushes right in here. And then on the other side is this rubber piece, and this will press through, and these two connect. And that, will prevent you from sliding the radiator up through this track here. So it just took me a few minutes of ripping on the radiator as hard as I could, trying to remove it, to figure out to remove this obstruction. And the new radiator, came with new hardware. We'll come over here and snap these on. Probably have to free up my hands. All right, so I'm going to cut to a different angle, but I'm going to install these little clips and get ready to pop this thing back in. All right, now that I have the new hardware on the radiator, the little retaining clips, I did go halfway down this track and remove the existing clips. I don't really think it was completely necessary, but I do think that's what was contributing to having it slide down the tracks freely. And I really had to fight with it to remove it. I mean, I was up here like a goddamn gorilla, just yanking on this thing, rocking it left and right, and finally got it to break free. Seems like it's going in much easier than it comes out naturally. But yeah, we'll film the reverse process, and this will help paint a picture of what's involved. Okay, I ended up just lifting up the radiator just a touch so I can work on the splash shield underneath. I'll show you what's involved with that. But before we do that, let's take a look at the book again. To install, reverse the removal procedure, removing the radiator. Of course, it didn't say if it removed upwards or downwards. And then we're going to remove the lower radiator track bolts. We did that, so we're going to reinstall them to 9 foot-pounds, so not much torque on that. And then it'll have us coming up on the splash shield and popping in these push pins. Here's these air conditioning transmission lines. So I just want this splash shield to flip upwards and move the radiator down a bit. just enough to align the areas for the lower radiator bolts to line up with the track. Just hand tighten this at first so it doesn't slide downwards anymore. That way I can get up to the top and work in those little rubber feet that I was showing earlier. Same on this side. Alright, so I got it just started. We'll button this splash shield up, get those little crappy plastic push pins in there to secure it up. Now I can maneuver this around a bit. Alright, I just sort of smashed that in there. Hopefully you can see that. This little rubber piece, I just smushed it through there. And this metal piece should press right through the other side of it, clamping it in there, hopefully. Yeah. I'll work the radiator over that before I bolt in the top two bolts. It's the same thing on this side. Alright, so I really just pushed the radiator forward as much as I could, and that opened up that little space for this little rubber piece to push in there. Struggle is real. Hoping you can see that. Now I'm just going to install the little metal piece, clamp that in there. Perfect. Now I'm going to get the radiator back into alignment. There we go. So now the bolt will go right through that fitting. Same on this side. So basically where I was confused is when I removed these top bolts here, I thought this would be free to slide upwards. And it just took me a few minutes to realize that this rubber grommet or whatever this is had to be pried out there, and it wasn't really easy to get it out. And this little metal piece that I've showed a few times here, how that was a pain to unclamp it from that rubber grommet on both sides here. So on the radiator bolts, I'm not even going to bother torquing down 9 foot-pounds. I'm just going to snug it down a bit. Call that good. Everything's fun with one hand. And while I'm down here, just want to mind these lines here and grab one of these little push pins you can grab from the automotive store. Let's see how much it fights me here. There you go. This is, of course, what I used to pry it off earlier. Beautiful. Okay, we torque those down. Disconnect the AC tube clip. What the hell is that? Number 11 AC tube clip. Where is that? That's up here on top of the radiator. Well, guess what? The clip's broken. Surprise, surprise. There's one on this side as well. So I'll probably put some zip ties on this until I can figure out what's going on with these clips, because they're donezo. Just gonna have to zip tie this up for now. Plastic clips don't last forever. Alright, so now that the electric cooling fan is reinstalled, it's time to install the upper shroud as well as the clutch fan and lower shroud, reattach the degas bottle and fill and bleed the system. But before doing that, you may have noticed I didn't reconnect the lower radiator hose. That's because while I'm in there, probably a good time to pop a new thermostat in there. So I'll show you what's involved with that real quick. Coming back to the instructions, this is where we ended off installing the electric cooling fan. But step 9, the lower radiator hose, I left that off because this is a good time to follow this up while we got the room, and this will attach to the lower thermostat, and we'll pop a new one in there. And going back to these clips that I zip tied, the AC tube clip, that's the part number, good time to order that. This is an exploded view of the thermostat housing. So from down below, here's that lower radiator hose, how it comes up. There's two 10 millimeter bolts, which we will take apart after the thermostat housing is disconnected from the engine block, which is held in by these two bolts coming in horizontally, tightening down to 18 foot-pounds. So looking up at the top of the motor here, the crossover fill tube comes over this top radiator hose, extends down, and comes down to this housing there. You may see that blue wing nut. Yours probably looks different. I swapped that out for a wing nut a while back, and I've already gone ahead and loosened that. So we'll pop this hose up, get this out of the way. You can see that one bolt is fairly accessible just below the oil dipstick, and I just have a little ratcheting wrench, 10 millimeter. And after some patience with that ratcheting wrench, you should be able to get in here with your fingertips and just loosen up the remainder of it. There's not enough room to get a socket and ratchet on here. And in fact, there's not even enough room to remove the bolt. It'll hit the frame of the car here, so just push it back in. And as this other bolt comes off and we try to remove the housing, we'll finagle it out of there. And coming below the driver fender well, just have the tire maneuvered out of the way a bit. You can see there's that second bolt, pretty easily accessible. Definitely a little easier if you happen to be rotating the tires right now to have the tire off completely, but you don't need to. You can probably get an extension with a socket on it. I was able to just get an impact on it. And then here's this other bolt in here. Good time to remove that out. And we're just going to pull it out from down below here. Grab that lower radiator hose. There's the housing. Could always remove that little drip pan for the oil filter as well, make it easier. Probably going to end up having to do that, possibly to reinstall it. Then here's the other two bolts shown there. So I'll open this guy up and pop a new thermostat in there and resume finishing up the radiator installation. don't know what was going on with Napa, but they gave me 2 thermostats, 2 O-rings. So we'll take it. They didn't charge me for it. Now this was like this here. So that would make this part, this bottom part, the top. And I believe this little copper piece is for air to come out, and it should be located on the top, I think. Put a little blue sealant, little Loctite thread sealer. And then with a little thread sealer, just get this bolt that's accessible from the top in before we position the thermostat into place. I can't get a torque wrench on there, so just get it tight and then a little tighter. Before installing the upper radiator hose, this little tube on the degas bottle, pop that on, and the bottom of the degas bottle, there's a little guiding pin, and you want to make sure that that's, I don't know, just in alignment. It doesn't really snap in, it just guides itself in there. Then reattach this bolt, which will be below this upper radiator hose, and that's screwing to the top of the fan shroud. radiator hose. We're getting there. Just need to fill it with some coolant and bleed out the air out of the heater cores. Do a little bit of that back and forth. Actually, we need to reinstall the clutch fan. That's probably important. 2 more bolts on the top of the degas bottle. This part can be miserable. It doesn't hurt to have somebody on the top helping you. But if you're alone, you got to have some patience. Try not to scratch up this cooler on the bottom. Sometimes it's easier just to take it off, get it out of the way. But I'm going to go for it. So one hand has to press on the fan clutch. While the other hand tries to spin it onto the threads of the bolt on the pulley. And it is a pain in the ass. Just have patience, keep it steady, spin it clockwise. And there it goes. And then we'll just tighten it down a bit with the fan clutch wrench, which doesn't need to tighten down too much because it will tighten as the serpentine belt spins the pulley on the fan. All right, so I have another video on this part of the procedure, but I'm going to do it again. But if you wanted to slow it down and get a more thorough shot of what I'm doing here, you can check out the video where I worked on the water pump on the Aviator. But you're going to see that we are going to need a specialty tool to install the, well, just to tighten down that fan clutch. Again, it's not as important for the tool as it was to remove the fan clutch, as it was on there quite tight. But here's the water pump pulley. It's got 4 bolts. This large crow's foot secures over 2 of those bolts to prevent the pulley from spinning as you're tightening it down with this 36mm wrench. And I have, this is what I do, I connect a large serpentine belt removal tool to it, like this. So it makes a large right angle for leverage. Now you can see how tight the area is here in between this upper crossover fill tube, which connects to the upper radiator hose, and the top fan shroud. So let's get some better light on there. That's how that large crow's foot sits on top of the water pump pulley. And I've made a right angle where that serpentine belt removal tool just rests against the battery while I get that long 36mm wrench to tighten it. So we'll see if, let me free up my hands here. That's good enough. Now I'm going to attach a breaker bar to the fan clutch wrench. Oh, that's tight enough anyway. And that makes the job much easier. All right, before I fill the coolant system and bleed the heater cores and burp the whole coolant system, I'm going to remove this air filter compartment. Take my face off. All right, we're going to start this procedure by filling 2 liters of coolant into the rear heater core. Now we have to follow the heater supply hose down to where it tees off, and where it continues upwards for the front heater core, we're going to clamp off at that location. That way the coolant works its way down with gravity. Let's get some of this stuff out of the way. Here's the heater supply hose, and it comes down and tees off downwards. Down below here goes to the rear heater core. As it continues forward and comes upward here, that's where we're going to clamp, so clamp it. In fact, let's do that now. Just like so. Here's the heater supply hose coming down. It tees down to the rear. As it continues forward and goes upwards, that's where we clamp. Number 3 here, clamp the front heater supply hose between the heater core and the coolant shutoff valve. And then we are going to raise the heater supply hose to its maximum elevation, and using a funnel, slowly pour in approximately 2 liters of coolant into the heater supply hose. Then we're going to remove the clamp. Now, instead of following all this stuff, it's going to make us take it all back apart anyway to start the front heater core filling, which will only take 1 liter of coolant into the hose. And that's the same procedure, but as it tees down, we clamp the rear heater supply hose. That way the fluid, which this is already full of fluid, it'll continue over and work its way up into the front heater core. So let's work on that. Following the upper radiator hose through the crossover fill tube, you'll locate the heater supply hose. Your clamp probably looks different again. I've done my best to put these little wing clamps on there. Probably on there very well. I'm going to change to a different angle, but this is what it's going to look like. I'm going to hold this up to its maximum elevation while I'm filling it, and it's going to stop at that clamp and work its way down to the rear heater core. This holds 1 liter. Now I've saved some coolant when I drained it out because it was still new coolant. And in fact, it's kind of orange looking. That's because I poured some of that copper stuff in there. I was hoping to stop that radiator leak, but it did not work. Now Now slowly, we're going to let it start pouring. We are filling the rear heater core. Okay, I'm going to close the valve on the funnel. And do 1 more liter. We're almost to the finish line here. All right, so that took 2 liters. Going to unclamp the front heater supply hose. So that is done. I'm going to switch to a better camera angle to show you how we are going to clamp the rear heater supply hose. Let's see, can we see this? We're going to lift it up a bit. We're going to clamp here. That way, as we fill, it's going to work its way up to the front heater core. It was dripping out a little bit as I was doing that. All right, I heard a little fluid coming out. I'm human. I made a mistake. I never reconnected the tube coming off the degas bottle. Luckily, it came out very slowly. Well, don't want to make that mistake. That's reattached. Make sure the radiator is closed. I assume that it is right out of the box. Yes, I was clamping the rear heater supply hose. I'm going to do the same thing. This is where I thought it was dripping out of. Okay, we're going to add 1 more liter. Okay, it wasn't crazy. It's not pouring down, and it's because this copper, I think, is filling the screen on my funnel, little filter screen. Okay, funnel number 2. And top off a little bit more fluid since I've lost some. Now I'm going to reattach the heater supply tube, clamp it off with my little wing nut. Now I'm going to unclamp the rear heater supply hose. Just have to pour this real slowly or it's going to want to overflow. So have some patience. And just keeping an eye on the degas bottle. We want to fill probably above the cold fill line, as once we get it up to temperature, it's going to suck down some fluid and we don't want it to get too low. All right, it almost took that 2nd gallon, but now we are up above the cold fill line. So what we want to do is reattach the crossover fill tube. And after we burp the system, we're going to top off at that fill tube. But after that, it's a good idea to put some anti-seize on that guy because it seizes up within a month easily. All right, so as I lower the vehicle down, we are going to run the motor. Let's see. All right, we're going to start the engine, select the defrost mode, and if at any time the engine overheats, we're going to stop the engine and carry out the front and rear heater core procedures, again, to remove any trapped air. We're going to run the engine for 2,000 RPMs until the thermostat opens 10 to 15 minutes into the cycle. It's going to be indicated by a drop in the degas bottle. And at that point, we'll set the climate control to a maximum heat and run the engine for an additional 2 minutes and take it from there. I like to follow some advice that I got from another YouTube video and actually push the motor to 3,500 and then let it run at idle for about 30 seconds and turn it off and just check the degas bottle, make sure it didn't suck too much down or that it isn't overflowing. And after letting it sit for about a minute, running it for another 30 seconds at 3,500 RPM to really try to purge the system. So we'll see how that goes. And yes, the lower shroud, haven't put that back on. Back to the top shroud. Get some light on there. There's a little clip, a little guidance clip, that upper shroud, when you slide it down, you want to make sure it's wedged in there. Okay, I'm just letting it slowly go back down to idle. Just gonna let it run for another 30 seconds or so and kill it for 1 minute and go see what the degas bottle looks like, if it's moved at all. So now I'm going to let it sit for 1 minute and then run the car again, let it idle for 30 seconds, run the motor for 30 seconds at 3,500 RPM, and then I'm just going to let it idle until it reaches temperature and take a look at the degas bottle from there. Okay, now that the motor is up to temperature, I'm going to push it one more time at 3,500 for 30 seconds. All right, now I'm going to kill the motor for 1 minute and go take a look at the degas bottle. All right, so I've done this a couple times, and the degas bottle level of coolant has risen and is not showing any indication of it dropping down. So I let the vehicle sit for about 5 minutes, and it seemed to lower down just a little bit. And now I've done that procedure one more time, running it for 2 minutes at 2,000 RPMs. I'm going to push it one more time at 3,500 RPMs, because I do feel heat coming out of the heater now, and we'll go take a look at the degas bottle. All right, I let the vehicle cool down for an hour or so, and the degas bottle level of coolant dropped quite a bit. So I topped it off, and I'm going to go for a drive and run the heat while I'm driving around. And I'm sure that once I get back, you know, hopefully that level drops, but sometimes it rises. I don't know why it does that, but after I turn the vehicle off for an hour or so, it burps it out and goes down. So I'll probably top it off one more time, and again add some anti-seize onto that crossover fill tube plug. And so hopefully this helps somebody out there. Thanks for watching.